I want to tell you about one of my greatest heroes. This man I hold him in such high esteem, but let me just give you the story here. In 2012, I was asked to speak at a church in California. And that Sunday morning, I looked at, I believe they have 1,200 people come every Sunday. And I preached the first service, and it was magnificent. The pastor, he's Italian, just the biggest lover. I mean, he's like a big teddy bear. And I just loved the guy instantly. I mean, he's Italian, come on. And it's a Christian Italian, I mean, does it get better? And so, great service. And we get in with the first service. There was 3 services that morning. And after the first service, we're walking out, and he points out a man who's greeting people. He was a greeter. He points out the man. He says, see the man? I said, yeah, see that man. He said, remember that man. I said, okay. He said, now, do you see that woman sitting right over there, back there? He said, remember that woman. I said, okay, I remember that woman. I remember that man. And we walked in his office. He said, John, I just want to share with you my story. He said, because you're involved in this. I said, okay. He said, back in 1987, I was the youth pastor for a very popular church here in this city. He said, we had 1,500 members. Now, you have to understand, 1987, 1,500 member church was big. I mean, we've broken the barriers here in the millennium we're living in now. But back then, that was a good-sized church. That was a mega church, right? And it was a very popular church. And he said, I was the youth pastor. I was married. I had 3 small children. And he said, my senior pastor one day ran off with my wife. He said, leaving me with my 3 small children. He said, John, to make matters worse, just 2 weeks earlier, I had buried my father. And now my senior pastor runs off with my wife. He said 2 weeks after that, so we're talking 1 month time period, the elders of the church looked at me and said, we're really believing for the senior pastor to come back, so we're going to release you. Because if you're here, he won't come back. I mean, talk about sick. Okay? So he said, John, within weeks, I was living in a friend's garage with my 3 kids. I couldn't pay rent, I was evacuated, and I'm living in a friend's garage. My dad's just died. My senior pastor, who is my father in the faith, runs off with my wife, and I'm now living in this garage with my 3 children. Well, time goes by, and in 1991, he ended up getting married, and in 1989, 2 years later, he got remarried. In 1991, he started his church, Hope Unlimited. And the church began to grow and grow and grow, and it became the church that I ministered at in 2012. He said, now, do you remember the man I pointed out to you and the woman I pointed out to you? I said, yeah. He said, that man was my senior pastor. And he said, that woman was my ex-wife. Now, his son's in the office, and I said, that's your birth mother. He said, yeah, that's my birth mother. I said, okay, you got to explain this to me. He said, well, John, in 1994, somebody handed me your book, The Bait of Satan, and I read it. And he said, God just began to start melting my heart. He said, in 1997, 3 years later, he said, when they came to me and they apologized to me, they said, we are so sorry for what we've done, and can we be a member of your church? He said, my first instinct was, there are plenty of churches in the area. He said, but God spoke to me so clear, and he said, I remember hearing his voice. He said, God said to me, you have the chance to forgive in the same way I've forgiven you. He said, John, I'm going to spend eternity in heaven with them. And he said, I made the choice to forgive them and allow them to come into the church. They've been here for 5 years. We just hired my ex-wife on to our accounting department, and he's one of our greeters. And he said, John, we have the greatest friendship. I just looked at him that day and I said, you're one of the greatest men I've ever met. I said, you truly forgave the way God has forgiven you. There's no way you can forgive that way. There's no way, unless you have the love of God shed abroad in your heart. Because God forgave us when we never deserved it. You have that ability in your heart. It's not worth being bound up in the bait of Satan, the trap of offense, and holding unforgiveness, and allowing roots of bitterness to continue to grow in the field of your heart, you have the ability, because the love of God is shed abroad in your heart, to forgive even when it's not deserved.